In this video here, I'm going to go over a IGCSE biology paper, and it's the 31 paper from October, November last year. It's a core paper, so it's a lot easier than the extended paper. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you the questions, and then I'm going to show you my ideas for good answers. Any mistake here, of course, mine and mine alone, so use it as you want to. All right, let's get rolling. So our first question here asks us to compare an animal cell and a bacterial cell. Normally they ask about animal and plant cells, but this time here they have chosen a bacteria instead. It's a 5-point question, so there's a lot of points here for getting it right. So please have a look at what you think should be the answers, and then on the next slide I'm going to give you the answers. The cell membrane can be found in both the animal and the bacterial cell. On the animal, it will always be number C, the outer one. But on our bacterial cell, you have to look a little more careful to make sure you choose the right one. This is where people usually lose the point. Cell wall. Well, animal cells don't have cell walls. Plant cells do, and so do the bacterial cell. So this here will be F on the bacterial cell. The cytoplasm is the liquid inside the cell. So on the animal, this will be B, and on the bacterial cell, this will be H. Nucleus, well, since animal cells are eukaryotes, they will have a nucleus, and bacteria being prokaryotes won't have any. So in the animal cell, this will be D, since A is our mitochondria. And plasmid DNA can only be found in the bacterial cell, and you can find that at H. So if you get all these right, you get 5 points quite easy. As I mentioned, you can also see the mitochondria in the animal cell, and then they use the command word state. When they say state, you should just give the function, and the function of the mitochondria is to do aerobic respiration with oxygen. The next one here is one of those biology questions where they ask you to actually use information from more than one chapter. So this is both from the cell chapter and from the reproduction chapter. But again, you just have to tick the right marks, and please try to find your own answers, and then on the next slide I will give you mine. The answers to this one here can be found on page 306 and 307 in your textbook if you're using the standard Cambridge textbook here. The eggs have energy store, and the enzymes in the acrosome are the enzymes that the sperm uses to penetrate and get into through the jellycoat. The flagellum is used for movement by the sperm, and the jellycoat is outside the egg. So if you get these right, again, these are easy points. Right. So we're moving over to a question here that is in chapter 18 in the book, Organisms and the Environment, as we're looking at a food web. This question here could also have easily been on a marine science exam, but here we have to look at a food web. We have to find an organism that feeds on the third trophic level, a herbivore, a carnivore, an organism that is a primary consumer and a secondary consumer, and state what the arrows represent. Try to come up with your own answers, and on the next slide I will give you my answers. So our third trophic level, our first trophic level will always be our producers, which in this case here is the algae and the plankton. Our second will be our first level consumers, our herbivores, and our third level will then be our second level consumers. In this case here, that can mean the turtles, that can be the large fish, that can be the starfish, and they can actually also be the sea urchins, because the sea urchins both eat the plankton, so then they're second level, but they also eat the small fish, then they're third trophic level. And it can be the starfish. Herbivores, they are the organisms who eat our algae and plankton. So that could be our sea cucumbers, that could be our small fish, and that could be our sea urchins. And carnivores, well, sea urchins eat small fish, that makes them a carnivore. Turtles, they eat sea cucumbers, so that makes them a carnivore. The large fish eat the small fish, that makes them a carnivore. The starfish, they eat small fish, well, in this case here, that makes them a carnivore. And the shark, being the apex predator, is also a carnivore. If you have a look at an organism that is a primary consumer and a secondary consumer, that will be our sea urchin because it both eats the plankton and the small fish. And the arrows are here meant as energy transfer to the ecosystem. So that's how the energy flows from one trophic level to the next. Now for the next one, then we have to make a food web. And the mistake I saw quite a few students do here is they didn't use the information in figure 2.1. So they just made their own food web, which is good, but is not what they ask for. And also, I had people who draw, and again, they say do not draw. So if you want to have a food web that contains 5 organisms, well, we can say plankton, then the small fish, starfish, large fish, and then the shark, and that will get you the point. Again, this is a good example, and you have to be careful to read exactly what they're asking in the question. The 2 next questions that comes here are 2 state questions. State the name of the process used by some producers to convert energy from light into chemical energy, and the only possible answer here is photosynthesis. And state the name of the type of organism that gets its energy from dead or waste organic material. That is, of course, our decomposers. Here's another example of a question that is easy, but there is one very important piece of information that I saw some students forget when we did a trial run of this one. So they show a coral grouper on a coral reef, and they say these are a popular food fish for humans. Overharvesting of the large fish would cause the turtle population to decrease. Use the information in figure 2.1 to explain why the turtle population would decrease. Then it's very important to go back to figure 2.1. In this case here, instead of large fish, you have to then put in the coral grouper on that part of the food web. Then this becomes an easy question, but if you don't look at 2.1, you can end up spending a lot of time and writing a lot of stuff that don't give you any points at all. So it's a 3-point question, so you need to state 3 things to get the points. I've written a bit more here, but we'll get over them. 1 point I will say will get from the fact that sharks will now eat more turtles. Sharks, they feed on turtles, large fish, and sea urchins. If you remove large fish from their diet, or limit it, well, then the sharks will have to eat more turtles and more sea urchins to get their energy need. This will lead to a larger predation on the turtles, as there are fewer large fish to eat, and that can decrease the turtle population due to predation. Also, when there are fewer of the large fish, in this case here, the coral grouper, well, then predation on the small fish will go down. As a population of small fish increases, they will feed more on the algae. When they feed more on the algae, there will be less algae for the sea cucumbers, and again, with fewer sea cucumbers, there will be less food available for the turtles, which could also, due to lack of food, reduce the amount of turtles. So the 2 things we're looking for here is predation and lack of food due to other organisms eating the algae. There are also other things you can get points for, but these are, at least to me, the most obvious way to get these points. Then we get a question here, which ties this first question here, which we had on the coral reef, into the entire thing about variation and selection. So here we have to finish the sentences, come up with 4 words, and that will give you 4 points. So think about what words you'll put in here, and then on the next slide, I'll give you my answers. Okay, In this case here, we know the fish species with few spots had a genetic variation in the population. When these fish, well, the word we're looking for here is reproduce or breed, some of the offspring were born with more spots than the other. Fish with more spots were better adapted to and this here, the word we're looking for is either the environment, or you can also get point for saying the coral reef, because predators then were less likely to see them. Fish with more spots had a greater chance of passing on the genetic information, or alleles, will both give you the points, for more spots into the next generation. This process is called natural selection, and if you have all four, you get 4 very easy points here. Okay, so we move on to question 3, which looks at plants. And they show you a photograph of some of the leaves. And you have to state 2 features of the leaves visible in the figure that are adaptations for photosynthesis. So come up with your own 2 features, and let's have a look at them on the next slide. So when I did this with a class, a lot of them wrote stuff like chlorophyll or chloroplasts, which are clearly adaptations for photosynthesis, but they're not visible on figure 3.1. So again, you really have to read the question. And the 2 ones I think I can see here is we have a large surface area, which gives a large area for the light to hit. And we have thin tissue, so there's a short diffusion way for the CO2 to get into the chloroplasts. There can be other answers that will give you the points, but it's very important that it's visible on the figure. So we move further on into what is chapter 6 in the book, plant nutrition. And if you look at this figure here, and if you look at your book here, you'll find exactly the same one on figure 6.11 and 6.13 in your textbook. So again, this shows why it's a good idea not only to read the text in the textbook, but also spend some time with the figures, because the figures in the exam will tend to look a lot like the one in our textbook. But here we are to look at 4 different parts of leaf, A, B, C, and D, and then we have to explain how the parts labeled are adapted to the leaf for gas exchange, and we have to state the name of the mineral iron that plants need to make chlorophyll. So try to come up with your own answers, and I'll give you my answers on the next slide. So here I've chosen to name the structures as well, so you know what part of the syllabus we're doing. A is a spongy mesophyll. It has an open structure that allows gases to move easy to the palisade where we have the mesophyll. And with gases, it might be a good idea to say we look at oxygen here and CO2. B are stromatas. It's a hole so they let the oxygen out and lets the CO2 into the leaf. C are the guard cell, which can open and close the stromata to control water loss and also gas diffusion, mainly oxygen out, CO2 in. And number D is our airspace, and that allows the CO2 to move easier in the leaf and get into the palisade where we have the largest concentration of the chloroplasts. So you have to know quite a bit about the leaf structure. The error I saw most people do here is they confuse the stromata and the guard cell. And the name of the mineral iron the plants need to make chlorophyll is magnesium. Our next question goes over into the chapter about transporting plants and asks us to complete the sentences about bundles and transport about the xylem and the phloem. So try come up with your own answers, and then on the next slide I'll give you my answers. Again, compared to some of the extended, it's really short answers we have to give here, but again, you have to know the answers to get the points. The leaf contains vascular bundles, and the vascular bundles you can find in chapter 8, the xylem and the phloem 8.1. It's on page 151 in the textbook. The xylem in the bundles support and transport water and minerals. That's important to remember. It's only water and minerals, and there's only one way. It goes from the roots to the leaf. The phloem in the bundle can move both ways, but not asking here, but it can also transport both amino acids and sucrose. The next one goes straight into chapter 15, reproduction in humans. And again, this is a complete, the same figure as figure 15.5 and 15.4 in the standard textbook. So again, the figures, they are really, really required reading and required understanding. So see if you can put on the names here, and we will have a look on the next slide to see how to get all 4 points. So our U are the testes, and the testes produces the sperm. The sperm is placed in the vagina by, you can get a correct answer for S, which is the penis, or for T, which is the urethra. Carries urine out of the body is only T, the urethra. And the thing that holds testes outside the body is, in this case here, R, which, again, if you want to have the name for it, is the scrotum. The next one is a classical one from the biology exam where they make you look at a graph and then you have to describe, calculate from it. And actually, when you look at it, it might look complicated, but actually you can get all 3 points here without knowing any biology. Basically, you have to be able to do the basic math and look at a graph. So see if you can get the 3 points here, and then on the next slide, I'm going to show you how I did. One of the answers I often seen here is people say, well, the length of the sperm changes. And while that is correct, we are looking for a specific answer. So if you want to make sure you get the points, I'll say it increases from about 60 to 118, and then it decreases to 108. This way, you're absolutely sure you get the point. Calculate the difference in length between the longest and the shortest, and then you have to be able to read the graph. The longest is 118, and the shortest is 60, so that will give a difference of 58. And state the testis size that has the longest sperm. The testis size is in arbitrary units, but I marked it with a line here, and that will be testis size number 6, which will give us the longest sperm. Again, that's a lot of points for only to be able to do the math. The next question goes into the chapter about respiration and gas exchange. And again, the figure here is pretty much the same as the one 11.3 in the book and 11.5. So again, look at the figures in your book. Try to come up with your answers and see if you get the points. I'll reveal my answers on the next one. The top here, F is the larynx, and G, well, a lot of people would then write, oh, that must be avolus, but it's not. What we're looking at here is the capillaries around. So it's important to answer capillary here. The next question looks at find the correct order to show how inspired gases move from the nose to the blood. And again, this one here can be answered by looking at 11.3 here in the textbook. So try to come up with your answers, and I'll give you my answers on the next slide. So here I actually chosen to put in a drawing of the human gas exchange system. It is not in the question, but just to help you if you have forgotten what the different words mean. We start in the trachea, so that will be our first, and then we move to the bronchus, and then the bronchioli, which is further down, and then get into alveoli, and from the alveoli it goes into the capillaries and then into the blood. We continue our questions about the difference between expired air and inspired air. We also ask about the testing for carbon dioxide and look at one other organ that excretes waste from our body. So see if you can find the 5 points here, and then I'll give you my answers on the next slide. So expired Expired air will of course contain more CO2 than inspired air because we use our process of expiring to get rid of CO2. Oxygen will be lower as some of the oxygen has been used, and water vapor will, well, normally be higher unless you are in a very, very moist environment. State the name of the substance used to test the presence of CO2. The syllabus, use lime water, but if you taught anything else, any other CO2 indicator, that will also give you the point. And the kidneys are the other organ that excretes waste. And then for the last question here, we move over to chapter 13, excretion and homeostasis, and they ask you to circle 3 other substances that we excrete. Try if you can find the 3 ones. It's 3 points. Well, amino acids, we want to use them. And the glycerol, hemoglobin, we don't excrete that. Mucus can confuse some people if you cough up mucus. And starch is from plants. So that leaves us the 3 ones, ions, urea, and water. And those are the things we usually find in urine. So these are your 3 points here. For next question, we go over to chapter 17 here, variance and selection. And we have to state the meaning of variation. In this case here, the biological term. And then we have some statements about variation where you have to place ticks in the boxes to show which statement contains either continuous or discontinuous variation. So in this case here, unless you know what variation is and continuous and discontinuous variation, you are going to lose a lot of points. So this is a rather specific question here. So try to come up with your answers and I'll show you my answers on the next slide. If you look at the keyword, and that is on page 348 in our standard textbook here, well, variation is difference between the individual of the same species. So that is the answer you need to give. All right. If there are no intermediate phenotypes, that is discontinuous variation. If there's a range of phenotypes between 2 extremes, that is continuous variation. And it's usually caused by genes and the environment both together, it is continuous variation. The next one here, they ask about 2 figures here. And again, if you have your textbook, these are basically the same figures as figure 17.2 and 17.5. Again, showing the utmost importance of looking at the figures in the textbook. So see if you can come up with your answers here, and also see if you can complete the statements about mutation, and then we'll see how to get the points. So our first one here looks a lot like figure 17.2 in the textbook, so I will choose blood groups here. But if you've been working with seed shape or seed color or wing color, that can be fine as well. The other one here, they have frequency and then the phenotype, and the phenotype can have a continuous variation. So that could be height, that could be body mass, for example. These are the examples of book uses. And the words we have to use in the last one here. Mutation is a genetic change in which new alleles are formed. The rate of mutation is increased by some chemicals and by ionizing radiation. Then we move on to chapter 19 here, human influence on the ecosystem. And we're looking at a graph. And again, you have to be able to read a graph and come up with some qualified information from that one. So see if you can figure out the answer to these questions here, and I'll give you mine on the next slide. So we have to identify the years when there was the largest increase in the percent of land used for farming. And if you look at where we have the steepest rate of change, that is from 1800 to 1900. You look at the graph. State the trend of the percentage of land used for housing. Well, the land used for housing increases over time, and I'll say especially from 1700 to today. And then we state the year where the percentage of land use for forest and wild plants was equal to percentage of land use for farming. And then you just have to be able to look very specifically and see that's 1970. Here again, you just have to look at the graph and it'll be a lot easier on the real paper. While the former points could be answered just by looking at the graph, for the next one here, we have to go in and use this thing from the syllabus on human influence on the ecosystem. And this is one of the longer one where we have to outline the undesirable effect of deforestation and state one way humans can damage the aquatic environment. There are quite a few different answers here who give you the points, but try to come up with yours, and I'll then show you which one I think is good. So the undesirable effect of deforestation, I would say the first one is reducing biodiversity, as there are fewer habitats, especially old forests get destroyed. Disruption of food web and chains that are depending on forest is also an undesirable effect. Habitat destruction. In worst case, you can also have extinction of species that depend on the forest if you have an animal like the orangutan who need the forest to live. And once you cut down the forest and the root no longer hold the soil in place, you will see more soil erosion come the rainy season. You can also see an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere as the trees no longer take up as much carbon dioxide, which can further the effect of global warming. Again, you just have to have 3 of them here to get the 3 points. The same for the last one. It just asks you to state one way humans can damage the aquatic environment, and quite a few. Overharvesting fish species, pollution. And if you say pollution, you have to be specific. You can't just say pollution. So in this case here, I said pesticide or mercury, because those are 2 specific causes of pollution. I also said the effect of sewage, if you have eutrophication and algae blooms, and pollution with non-biodegradable plastics. You just have to choose one of them here to get the point. Then we have the question about yeast, which goes into the last chapter, biotechnology and genetic modification. So try to see if you can come up with your answers here. It's 5 points on the line. It's a lot of points from drawing some lines and answering 2 states about anaerobic respiration. It's important to read the question here. Draw 3 lines, not 2, not 4. Anaerobic respiration in yeast, it will break down nutrient molecules, so that's 1 line. It is a chemical reaction, that's also 1 line. Only takes place in the ribosomes. If you can remember your first chapters, ribosomes is where we have protein synthesis, so it's not that one. Lactic acid is not yeast. Releases less energy than aerobic respiration. Yes, it does. Requires oxygen? No, because we're talking about anaerobic respiration, not aerobic respiration. And then we have to state 2 ways anaerobic respiration in yeast is used in biotechnology. And one of them is simply in baking bread, and one is in fermentation, which causes us to produce ethanol or alcohol, either for consumption or to use in biofuels, and that's a process of fermentation. Our last question then looks into investigation of a production where we have a student having different glucose concentration, and then he looks on the volume of gas produced by the yeast. And then they ask you to calculate the rate of the gas production and give your answer in 2 decimal places. So see if you can calculate it and come up with an answer for 2 decimals. So our rate is set as 1 divided by time, so it's 1 divided by 60. And if you want to find that, the 2 decimals is give us 0.02, and then of course they already stated the unit. So then we can look at how many points you need to get the different grades. Since this is core, our highest possible grade is C, which comes from 46 out of the 80 points. D is a 40, and so on all the way down. And you might notice, which is quite common in a core test like this, that they don't ask about everything. There's quite a lot of things they usually ask about. They didn't ask about this time. There was no biological molecules, no osmosis and movement in cells, no enzymes and temperature, and nothing about the heart or circulation there, nothing about diseases and immunity, and very little about hormones. So it's always that in these tests here, you don't get to cover the entire syllabus, you get to cover some of it. I hope you could use this one here, and next video I will look at the extended test from the same year.